The moment they took his daughter, they stopped being kidnappers and started counting down the last peaceful hours of their own lives. The little elementary school sat beneath a bright September sky in rural Montana, where pickup trucks outnumbered luxury cars, and everyone seemed to know everyone else's name. Children poured through the front entrance carrying oversized backpacks, lunchboxes swinging at their sides, while parents exchanged quick waves before rushing off to another workday. Nothing about that ordinary Tuesday hinted that it would become the day an entire town remembered forever. Ethan Walker parked his faded Ford F-150 beside the curb exactly where he always did. The truck had over 200,000 miles on it, its paint weathered by years of harsh winters and long days hauling generators and repair equipment across the county. Ethan climbed out wearing worn work boots, a faded denim jacket, and a baseball cap that had streaks of gray beginning to creep into his dark hair. He looked like every other hard-working father trying to balance bills, responsibilities, and the quiet promise he had made to never let his daughter feel alone again. Emily Walker skipped beside him, clutching a science project she had spent the entire weekend building from cardboard, glue, and more determination than perfection. "Daddy," she laughed, holding it carefully with both hands. "Mrs. Peterson said if this volcano actually works, she'll let me demonstrate it for the whole class." Ethan smiled, the kind of smile that appeared only when Emily was talking. "I never doubted you for a second, even when it exploded all over the kitchen, especially then." Emily giggled so loudly that another parent turned and smiled before walking inside with her own son. Ethan crouched to straighten the loose strap on Emily's backpack. "Remember what Mom used to say?" Emily nodded immediately. "Kind people are stronger than loud people." "That's right." And she grinned, knowing there was always one more lesson. "Pay attention to everything," she answered proudly. Ethan gently tapped the side of her backpack. "Good girl." She wrapped her arms around his neck for one quick hug, before hurrying toward the front entrance. Ethan watched until she disappeared through the doors. He always watched. Ever since losing his wife 5 years earlier, he never drove away until he knew Emily was safely inside. It had become their silent ritual, one neither of them ever questioned. A cool breeze drifted across the parking lot, carrying the scent of fresh pine and damp earth after the previous night's rain. Somewhere nearby, a flag snapped softly against its pole while the distant sound of construction echoed across town. Life continued exactly as it always had. Ethan climbed back into his truck, started the engine, then paused. His eyes settled briefly on the rearview mirror. Something felt different. Not wrong exactly, just unfamiliar. Across the street, a dark SUV sat parked beneath a row of cottonwood trees. Its windows were heavily tinted. The engine idled quietly. Most people would never have noticed it. Ethan did. His gaze lingered only a second before he looked away and pulled into traffic. By the time he reached the county road leading toward his first repair job, the uneasy feeling had faded beneath another ordinary workday. 23 minutes later, his phone rang. The number belonged to Pine Creek Elementary. Ethan answered with an easy smile still lingering in his voice. "Emily forget her lunch again?" The silence on the other end lasted only 2 heartbeats, but it was enough to erase every trace of warmth from his face. "Mr. Walker," the principal said, struggling to keep her voice steady. Emily never made it to her classroom. Ethan's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "What do you mean?" "She entered the building, but she disappeared before first period. Security can't account for where she went." Every sound inside the truck vanished. The tires still rolled across the pavement. The engine still hummed beneath the hood. But Ethan heard none of it. He simply turned the wheel without another word, making a smooth U-turn toward town. His breathing remained calm. His hands never shook. His expression never changed. Anyone passing him would have seen nothing more than a father driving home. No one could have guessed that. Somewhere deep beneath that quiet exterior, something long buried had just opened its eyes. The drive back to Pine Creek Elementary should have taken 12 minutes, but Ethan Walker covered the distance in less than 8 without breaking a single traffic law. Every movement behind the wheel was measured, every turn smooth, every stop deliberate. To anyone watching, he looked like a father rushing to his daughter. Inside his mind, however, every passing second was becoming another piece of a puzzle that refused to fit. By the time he stepped out of his truck, sheriff's deputies had already blocked part of the parking lot with patrol vehicles. Teachers stood together in small circles, whispering with anxious faces while parents gathered behind temporary barriers, searching for answers that no one seemed able to provide. Principal Linda Peterson hurried toward Ethan, her eyes red from fighting tears. "I am so sorry," she said softly. "We have searched every classroom, every hallway, every storage room." Emily was seen entering the building at 8:14 this morning, but she never arrived in Mrs. Carter's classroom. Ethan looked at her calmly. "Show me the cameras." She blinked. "The sheriff is already reviewing them." "Show me anyway." There was something about his steady voice that made people stop arguing. It was not loud. It did not demand authority. Yet somehow it carried the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions when hesitation cost lives. Inside the security office, several deputies crowded around computer monitors. Sheriff Daniel Brooks turned as Ethan entered. "I know you want answers," he said gently, "but let us do our job." Ethan nodded once. "Play the footage from 8:10. One deputy hesitated before pressing the keyboard. Grainy surveillance video filled the monitor. Emily appeared exactly as Ethan remembered, carrying her science project and smiling as she walked through the front entrance. Students surrounded her on every side. Teachers greeted children near the office. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. Then Emily disappeared behind a hallway corner where another camera should have picked her up. It never did. The next camera showed only an empty corridor for nearly 30 seconds before other students entered the frame. Ethan leaned slightly closer. "Stop." The deputy froze the image. "Back 5 seconds." The footage rolled backward. "Stop again." Sheriff Brooks frowned. "What are you seeing?" Ethan pointed toward a reflection inside a polished trophy case at the edge of the hallway. Barely visible in the distorted glass was the outline of a person standing where no one should have been. The figure never appeared directly on camera, only as a faint reflection. One deputy squinted. "I never noticed that." Ethan remained silent. "Zoom in." The image became blurry, but one detail remained clear enough. A dark baseball cap with a white mountain logo stitched above the brim. Sheriff Brooks looked confused. "That could be anybody." Ethan quietly shook his head. "No. You recognize it?" Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied every corner of the frozen frame before speaking. "Play the next 10 seconds." The hallway remained empty. Too empty. Students should have continued walking through. They did not. "Listen," Ethan said. The deputy increased the volume. At first, there was only the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. Then a distant metallic sound echoed briefly through the speakers. Click, click. Ethan closed his eyes for less than a second. "A loading ramp," he whispered. "Portable aluminum." Sheriff Brooks exchanged puzzled looks with another deputy. "You can tell that from one sound?" Ethan opened his eyes. It was not inside the school. The room felt quiet. Even Principal Peterson stared at him differently now. Before anyone could ask another question, a young woman wearing a navy blue Federal Bureau of Investigation windbreaker stepped into the office carrying a thin folder. She looked to be in her middle 30s, composed, sharp, and observant. "Special Agent Claire Bennett," she introduced herself. "The Bureau has been asked to assist because the circumstances suggest organized planning." She offered Ethan a respectful nod instead of empty sympathy. "Mr. Walker, I know this is difficult, but we need you to answer a few questions." Ethan met her eyes. Without hesitation. "You are asking the wrong questions." Claire paused. "What do you mean?" Ethan looked back toward the frozen image on the monitor. "Whoever took Emily did not choose her this morning." His voice remained steady. "They chose her weeks ago." The office became so quiet that the faint hum of the computers suddenly sounded louder than anyone's breathing. Claire Bennett studied Ethan Walker for several long seconds, searching his face for panic, denial, or desperation. She found none of them. Instead, she found something she rarely encountered during crisis investigations: absolute control. It unsettled her more than open grief ever could. Most parents overwhelmed investigators with questions. Ethan asked none. He simply kept watching the frozen security image as though every answer was already hidden inside it. Sheriff Daniel Brooks finally broke the silence. "Why do you think they planned this for weeks?" Ethan pointed toward the reflection in the trophy case. "That person never looked toward Emily." Claire folded her arms. "Would not that suggest she was not the target?" Ethan slowly shook his head. "No. It suggests confidence." Experienced surveillance teams do not stare at the person they are watching. They watch everyone else. Several deputies exchanged uncertain glances. Claire noticed something else. Ethan never used words like maybe or probably. Every sentence sounded careful, measured, and built upon observation instead of emotion. She stepped closer to the monitor. Explain the hallway. Ethan looked at the timeline displayed beneath the video. The camera skips 28 seconds. One deputy immediately answered. The system occasionally drops frames. Ethan calmly replied, not here. He pointed toward the digital clock. The timestamp continues normally. Someone interrupted the recording without interrupting the clock. Claire narrowed her eyes. She had reviewed surveillance systems for years, yet she had missed it. Before she could respond, another deputy hurried into the office carrying a sealed evidence bag. Inside rested a small pink backpack decorated with tiny blue butterflies. Ethan recognized it instantly. Emily never went anywhere without it. Maintenance found this behind the gymnasium, the deputy explained. Nothing appears stolen. Ethan accepted the bag carefully. He never opened it. He simply held it in both hands for a moment before closing his eyes. She left this on purpose, he said quietly. Sheriff Brooks frowned. How can you know that? Ethan gently turned the backpack toward the light. One shoulder strap had been twisted twice before being fastened. Claire noticed nothing unusual until Ethan spoke again. Every camping trip, I taught Emily that if she could not leave words, she should leave patterns. He traced the twisted strap through the plastic evidence bag. 2 twists means I am alive. The room fell silent again. Claire looked from the backpack to Ethan. You taught an 8-year-old survival signals? Ethan answered without pride. I taught my daughter how to stay calm when adults cannot. No one spoke for several moments. Outside the office window, reporters had already begun gathering behind yellow tape, while television vans rolled into the parking lot. News traveled quickly through small towns, and fear traveled even faster. Claire's phone vibrated. She stepped into the hallway, listened briefly, then returned. A witness reported seeing a dark sport utility vehicle heading west on Highway 12 around 8:20. We are organizing search teams now. Ethan immediately asked, license plate? Partial. Only 3 numbers. Vehicle make? Possibly a Chevrolet or a Ford. Ethan looked toward the map hanging beside the security monitors. His eyes traveled across county roads, rivers, abandoned mills, and logging trails. They did not go west. Sheriff Brooks looked surprised. That is the only witness we have. Ethan nodded politely. Then your witness saw the decoy. Claire stared at him. You are making a very confident assumption. Ethan walked toward the map and pointed east instead. West leads to interstate traffic and highway cameras. East leads into national forest, old mining roads, and places where no one asks questions. Claire studied the map herself. He was right about the terrain. East offered dozens of forgotten service roads hidden beneath thick pine forests. Still, she needed evidence, not instinct. Why would they leave a witness at all? She asked. Ethan answered almost immediately. Because frightened people chase the first story they hear. His voice remained calm, almost gentle. Disciplined people verify it. Claire felt an unfamiliar sensation settle over her. It was not trust. Not yet. It was curiosity mixed with respect. There was far more to this quiet electrician than anyone in Pine Creek realized. And somewhere beyond the school, hidden beneath endless forests and mountain roads, someone believed they had outsmarted an ordinary father, never realizing that every minute they delayed, they were giving him more time to understand exactly how they thought. The command post expanded into the school library as folding tables filled with county maps, satellite photographs, radio equipment, and laptops streaming live traffic cameras from across the region. Volunteers arrived carrying bottled water and coffee, while dispatchers answered an endless chorus of ringing phones. Outside, helicopters from neighboring counties circled the mountains in widening patterns, their distant rotors blending with the wind that swept across the pine trees surrounding Pine Creek. Hope still lived in every conversation, but the clock had quietly become everyone's greatest enemy. Claire Bennett stood over the largest map with a red marker in her hand, assigning search grids to deputies and state troopers. Every available resource was moving west exactly as the witness had reported. Every available resource except one man. Ethan Walker remained near the evidence table, studying Emily's backpack again with patient concentration. He was not staring at it as a grieving father. He was reading it as though it contained another message no one else had discovered. Claire finally walked over. "We are deploying additional teams toward Highway 12, she said. "If the vehicle changes direction, aviation units should be able to track it." Ethan looked up calmly. "You are searching where they wanted you to search." Claire exhaled slowly. "I cannot redirect dozens of officers because of intuition." "It is not intuition." Ethan carefully pointed toward the shoulder strap again. "Emily twisted this twice. She knew I would understand." Claire nodded. "She is alive." "Yes." "What else?" Ethan gently turned the evidence bag until the sunlight coming through the library windows reflected across the fabric. Tiny grains of pale dust shimmered against the pink canvas. Claire leaned closer. "That was not here before," she admitted. Ethan rubbed 2 fingers together without touching the bag. "Limestone." Claire frowned. "There are limestone roads all over the county. Not this color." Ethan walked toward the county map and quietly traced a circle east of town. "Old Black Ridge Quarry." Sheriff Brooks looked up from another table. "That quarry has been abandoned for nearly 20 years. "Exactly," Ethan answered. "No regular traffic. No security cameras. Plenty of storage buildings." Claire studied the location. Dense forests surrounded the property, and only 2 service roads reached it. It was isolated enough to disappear from ordinary patrol routes. Before she could respond, one of the communications officers hurried across the room, carrying a printed report. "Agent Bennett," he said, "we found the sport utility vehicle from the witness statement." Claire immediately looked up. "Where?" "Parked outside a motel 30 miles west. It was reported stolen yesterday." Ethan never reacted. Claire noticed that immediately. "It was abandoned," the deputy continued. "No occupants." The room grew quiet. Sheriff Brooks slowly looked toward Ethan. "A decoy," he murmured. Ethan simply nodded once. Claire felt an uncomfortable realization settle over her. The father everyone believed they needed to protect had predicted the deception before law enforcement confirmed it. She turned back toward the quarry on the map. "How certain are you?" Ethan answered with the same measured tone he had used all morning. "Certain enough to go." Claire hesitated. Federal procedure demanded verification, warrants, coordination, and risk assessment. Every rule existed for good reason. Yet every minute spent waiting gave whoever planned this operation more time to disappear. She studied Ethan again. His breathing remained steady. His shoulders were relaxed. His eyes moved across the map with quiet precision, never wandering, never searching randomly. It looked less like guesswork and more like memory. "Have you been to Black Ridge before?" she asked. Ethan paused for the first time that day. "Years ago. Working." A faint shadow crossed his expression before disappearing almost immediately. "Something like that." Claire recognized the answer for what it was, not dishonesty, but distance. There was a chapter of this man's life he had locked away so completely that even now he refused to open it. Before anyone could continue, Ethan's phone vibrated once inside his jacket pocket. The screen displayed an unknown number with no caller identification. Every conversation inside the library stopped. Ethan answered without placing the phone on speaker. "This is Ethan." For several long seconds, he listened without speaking. No voice came through. Only faint background noise drifted across the line. Wind, metal rattling softly. Then, almost hidden beneath the static, came 3 clear notes whistled slowly in perfect rhythm. Ethan closed his eyes. When the call disconnected, Claire stepped forward. "Did they threaten you?" Ethan slipped the phone back into his pocket. "No." "Then what happened?" A gentle smile appeared on his face for the first time since Emily disappeared. It was small, almost invisible, but filled with certainty. "My daughter just told me exactly where she is." No one in the library spoke for several seconds after Ethan Walker quietly announced that Emily had revealed her location. Claire Bennett searched his expression for even the smallest hint of wishful thinking, but there was none. His confidence did not come from hope. It came from certainty. 3 notes, Ethan said softly, looking toward the county map. She repeated the same 3 notes over and over when we hiked together. Claire folded her arms. "A song?" "No. A direction." He stepped to the map and rested one finger on Black Ridge Quarry. Sound travels differently there because of the limestone walls. When the wind moves through the eastern cut, it creates the exact whistle Emily Copy. Sheriff Daniel Brooks looked skeptical. You taught your daughter to recognize wind patterns? Ethan answered with quiet humility. I taught her to notice things most people ignore. Claire remained silent. Every conversation she had shared with Ethan since arriving at Pine Creek had left her with more questions than answers. He never exaggerated. He never tried to impress anyone. Yet every observation he made continued proving correct. One of the communications specialists interrupted the silence. Agent Bennett, satellite images from this morning just came in. Claire walked quickly to the laptop as fresh aerial photographs appeared on the screen. The quarry looked abandoned exactly as expected. Empty buildings, rusted equipment, overgrown access roads. Then Ethan leaned closer. Zoom in on the maintenance shed. The technician enlarged the image. Behind the weathered structure, faint tire tracks curved through the pale limestone dust before disappearing beneath a stand of pine trees. Claire narrowed her eyes. Those tracks are fresh. Sheriff Brooks slowly nodded. Last night's rain should have erased anything older. Ethan quietly added. One vehicle entered. None left. The room became still again. Claire immediately reached for her radio. All available units. Hold your current positions. New operational priority. Prepare for coordinated movement toward Black Ridge Quarry. As deputies hurried to relay orders, Claire noticed Ethan already collecting his jacket from the back of a chair. Where are you going? She asked. With you. Absolutely not. Her response came instantly. This is now an active Federal Bureau of Investigation operation. Ethan looked at her with the same calm expression that never seemed to change. You are walking into a place chosen by people who planned every detail. Claire met his gaze without blinking. That is exactly why you cannot come. Ethan did not argue. Instead, he quietly asked, how many entrances does the quarry have? Claire hesitated before answering. 2. Ethan gently shook his head. 4. He pointed toward the satellite image. The original mining tunnels were sealed on paper, not in reality. The eastern drainage tunnel still connects to the lower storage yard. Claire stared at the map. She had reviewed the property records less than an hour earlier. None of them mentioned another entrance. How do you know that? She asked. Ethan paused. The library seemed to grow quieter around him. Finally he spoke. Because I helped map them. Before Claire could ask another question, an older deputy standing near the doorway suddenly froze. He had been studying Ethan ever since the operation began. Slowly, almost uncertainly, he stepped closer. Walker, he asked. Ethan turned. Recognition flickered briefly across his face. Deputy Collins. The older man removed his hat without realizing he had done it. I knew I remembered you. Sheriff Brooks looked confused. You two know each other? Collins nodded slowly, never taking his eyes off Ethan. 15 years ago, I worked security during a joint federal exercise outside Helena. His voice lowered with unmistakable respect. They told us a rescue team completed the entire mission before the observers even realized it had started. Claire watched Ethan carefully. He remained completely still. Collins continued, almost speaking to himself. The instructor leading that team. He swallowed. His name was Ethan Walker. The room fell silent. Several deputies looked from Collins to Ethan and back again. Claire felt the pieces inside her mind begin fitting together. The discipline, the observations, the complete absence of panic. None of it belonged to an ordinary electrician. Ethan simply picked up his worn denim jacket and slipped it over his shoulders. That was a long time ago, he said quietly. Collins gave a faint smile. Maybe. He looked around the room at everyone listening. But if this is the same Ethan Walker I met back then, whoever planned this operation has made the biggest mistake they will ever realize, because they thought they were hiding from a father, when all along they were being found by the man who once built his entire life around bringing people home. The convoy left Pine Creek just as the afternoon sun slipped behind gathering clouds, casting long shadows across the winding mountain roads, leading toward Black Ridge Quarry. Sheriff Daniel Brooks coordinated deputies from the lead vehicle, while Claire Bennett reviewed satellite images one final time on a secure tablet. Ethan Walker sat silently in the passenger seat of an unmarked sport utility vehicle beside Claire, his attention fixed on the passing landscape rather than the screen. He was not searching for the quarry anymore. He was searching for everything around it. Every abandoned fence, every fresh tire mark, every flock of birds suddenly changing direction became another quiet observation stored inside his mind. Claire finally lowered the tablet. Deputy Collins told me you trained rescue units years ago. Ethan kept looking through the windshield. That was another life. You never mentioned it. You never asked. His answer carried no bitterness, only simple honesty. Claire nodded thoughtfully. Why leave? Ethan remained quiet for several moments before speaking. Because one day, I realized my daughter deserved a father more than the country needed another instructor. The words settled inside the vehicle with unexpected weight. Claire understood then that whatever uniform Ethan once wore had never defined him. Fatherhood had. The convoy slowed as the pavement ended and an old gravel service road disappeared into dense pine forest. Radios crackled softly while deputies confirmed positions. The quarry lay less than 1 mile ahead. Sheriff Brooks issued careful instructions. Nobody advances until every perimeter team is in place. Ethan quietly looked toward the trees on the eastern ridge. They already know we are coming. Claire followed his gaze. How? Ethan pointed upward. A pair of ravens suddenly lifted from the treetops before circling away toward the quarry. Birds do not leave healthy forest without a reason. Claire watched the birds disappear beyond the ridge line. Seconds later, another deputy reported over the radio that fresh engine noise had been detected somewhere inside the property. Ethan had been right again. The operation paused while tactical teams adjusted their approach. Instead of appearing frustrated by the delay, Ethan stepped away from the vehicles and crouched beside the gravel road. He brushed aside a thin layer of limestone dust until several faint impressions became visible. Claire joined him. Footprints? She asked quietly. Ethan nodded once. 3 adults entered from this direction. He traced another set of smaller marks barely visible between them. Emily walked here too. Claire looked closer but could barely distinguish the outline. How can you tell? Ethan smiled faintly. The left shoe dragged slightly. Claire remembered seeing Emily skip across the school parking lot that morning. Her left sneaker had always worn down faster because of the way she walked. Ethan continued studying the ground before pointing toward a tiny object resting beneath a fallen pine branch. Claire carefully picked it up. It was a small white bead shaped like a star. Her bracelet, Claire whispered. Ethan nodded. She made it at church last summer. Claire turned the bead over in her palm. She left it for you. No, Ethan replied gently. She left it for whoever was paying attention. Those words lingered in Claire's mind as tactical officers quietly prepared equipment nearby. Emily was only 8 years old, yet she had remembered every lesson her father had ever taught her. Stay calm. Notice everything. Leave a trail without being seen. The realization filled Claire with admiration rather than sadness. A child had answered fear with courage because her father had filled her life with confidence instead of panic. Suddenly, a young deputy hurried toward Sheriff Brooks carrying a handheld radio. Sir, motion sensors just picked up activity near the western storage buildings. Brooks immediately turned to Claire. Looks like they are moving. Ethan calmly shook his head before anyone responded. No. Claire looked at him. What makes you say that? Ethan pointed toward the forest surrounding them. The wind had completely changed direction, carrying the scent of damp stone and pine resin from deeper inside the quarry. If they were leaving, he said quietly, the birds would still be flying. He looked toward the silent treetops where the ravens had already returned to their branches. They stopped because nothing is chasing them anymore. Claire slowly realized what he meant. Whoever was inside the quarry had stopped moving as soon as they detected law enforcement. They were waiting, watching, expecting everyone to enter through the obvious route. Ethan looked toward the eastern ridge where thick brush concealed an almost invisible drainage path disappearing beneath weathered limestone. The front entrance is the distraction, he said. Emily is somewhere they believe no one remembers exists. Claire followed his gaze toward the hidden passage, and, for the first time since arriving in Pine Creek, she made a decision based not only on evidence, but also on complete trust in the quiet father standing beside her. Claire Bennett quietly redirected half of the tactical team toward the hidden drainage tunnel while Sheriff Daniel Brooks maintained the visible operation near the main quarry entrance. Flashing emergency lights remained exactly where anyone inside the property would expect them, creating the appearance of a full approach from the west. Meanwhile, beneath the shelter of towering pines and weathered limestone cliffs, a much smaller group moved silently through the eastern forest. Ethan Walker walked near the front, not because anyone had appointed him to lead, but because every step he took seemed guided by details no one else could see. Fallen branches remained undisturbed. Moss clung to damp rocks where sunlight rarely reached. The cool air carried the earthy scent of wet stone and cedar, while distant drops of water echoed somewhere beneath the old mining tunnels. It was strangely peaceful, almost beautiful, except for the knowledge that Emily was somewhere beyond the darkness. Claire noticed Ethan pause beside a narrow stream that crossed the trail. Without speaking, he knelt and studied the muddy bank for only a moment before pointing towards several tiny impressions near the water's edge. "She stepped here," he whispered. Claire carefully looked down. At first she saw nothing except uneven mud. Then Ethan gently brushed aside a layer of damp leaves, revealing the faint outline of a small sneaker print beside much larger boot prints. "She crossed without being carried," he said softly. "They wanted her to walk." Claire felt relief settle quietly inside her. It meant Emily was still thinking clearly enough to cooperate when necessary instead of resisting recklessly. Ethan smiled almost imperceptibly. "That is my girl." They continued deeper into the trees until the narrow trail disappeared beneath an aging concrete drainage tunnel partially hidden by vines and overgrown brush. Most people would have walked past it without noticing. Claire looked inside. Cool air drifted outward, carrying the steady sound of dripping water. "This place is not even marked on current maps," she said. Ethan nodded. "It was built during the original mining operation more than 40 years ago." Claire glanced toward him. "You really helped survey this area?" Ethan remained quiet for several steps before answering. "Not for mining." She understood immediately that whatever assignment had once brought him here remained classified or deeply personal. She respected the silence. The tunnel gradually widened into an old maintenance corridor reinforced with aging steel beams. Rust covered most of the metal, yet the structure remained stable. Tactical officers moved carefully, speaking only through quiet hand signals. Every footstep echoed gently against the stone walls before fading into the darkness ahead. Suddenly, Ethan stopped again. He slowly raised one hand. Everyone froze. Claire listened carefully. At first, she heard only water dripping somewhere ahead. Then another sound reached them, so soft it was almost impossible to notice. Someone was humming. 3 simple notes. The exact same melody Ethan had heard through the anonymous phone call. His eyes warmed immediately. "Emily," he whispered. Claire closed her eyes briefly, letting the tiny melody guide her ears through the winding tunnel. It was not loud enough to attract unwanted attention, yet it repeated at careful intervals. Not randomly, deliberately. Ethan quietly smiled. "She remembers." Claire looked at him. "Remembers what?" "I taught her that music travels farther than whispers underground." The tactical officers exchanged amazed glances. Emily was not calling for help. She was navigating with sound. Ethan listened again before quietly changing direction at a narrow intersection where another tunnel disappeared toward the north. Claire frowned. The humming came from straight ahead. Ethan gently shook his head. The echo came from straight ahead. He pointed toward the side passage. "The source is there." One of the deputies tested the acoustics by softly tapping a flashlight against the wall. The sound bounced exactly as Ethan predicted. Claire could not hide her admiration anymore. "You taught her how to use echoes?" Ethan answered with complete humility. "We used to make games out of camping trips." His voice softened. "She thought we were just having fun." They advanced into the northern passage where the air grew warmer and the faint smell of fresh coffee drifted through the tunnel, a small but unmistakable sign that someone had occupied the area recently. Then Ethan noticed one final clue resting quietly beside the wall. A folded paper snowflake, carefully cut from notebook paper. Claire immediately recognized it from the school security footage. Emily had been carrying one that morning with her science project. Ethan picked it up gently and unfolded it. Written inside, in careful block letters that only a father would immediately understand, were 6 simple words. "I knew you would find me, Daddy." Claire Bennett carefully folded the paper snowflake and handed it back to Ethan Walker without saying a word. She had spent her career studying crisis situations, yet nothing she had ever witnessed compared to the quiet trust shared between this father and his daughter. Emily had never doubted he would come. Ethan slipped the snowflake into the inside pocket of his denim jacket as though it were the most valuable thing he owned. "She is close," he whispered. The team moved forward with even greater care. The tunnel curved gently before opening into a forgotten maintenance chamber where rusted pipes lined the walls and old mining equipment rested beneath decades of dust. Faint light filtered through cracked skylights high above, painting narrow beams across the stone floor. Ethan slowly looked around the room, saying nothing. Claire watched him, instead of the surroundings. She had learned that when Ethan became completely still, he was usually noticing something everyone else had overlooked. After several seconds, he quietly pointed toward an old wooden table. A metal coffee cup rested beside it. Steam no longer rose from the surface, but one side of the cup remained damp with fresh condensation. "Someone left recently," Claire whispered. Ethan nodded once. "Less than 15 minutes. A tactical officer stepped closer. "How can you tell?" Ethan gently touched the outside of the cup with the back of one finger. "The stone is cool. The cup is not." No one questioned him anymore. Outside the chamber, Sheriff Daniel Brooks reported through the radio that the visible operation at the western entrance had successfully held everyone's attention. There had been movement near several abandoned buildings exactly where Ethan predicted, but no sign of Emily. Claire answered quietly, "Maintain your position. We are continuing east." As the team entered another narrow corridor, a small voice drifted softly through the darkness. "Daddy." Every person stopped instantly. Ethan closed his eyes for one brief moment before answering in the same calm tone he had always used at bedtime, during camping trips, and every morning before school. "I am here, sweetheart." A few seconds passed before the little voice answered again. "I knew you would find the secret tunnel." Ethan smiled warmly. "You remembered our game. You always said there is another way if people stay calm." Claire felt tears threaten the corners of her eyes, not from fear, but from witnessing courage built through love instead of force. Ethan slowly rounded the final corner. Emily sat safely inside a small storage room near an open doorway, wrapped in a clean blanket with her butterfly backpack resting beside her. The moment she saw her father, her face lit with quiet relief rather than panic. Ethan walked toward her without rushing, lowering himself to one knee before opening his arms. Emily stepped into the embrace she had never stopped believing would come. Neither of them spoke for several long seconds. The silence carried more meaning than words ever could. Claire discreetly signaled the tactical officers to continue securing the surrounding area while giving the father and daughter their moment together. Emily finally leaned back, just enough to look at Ethan. "Did I do everything right?" Ethan gently brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You did everything perfectly." She smiled proudly. "I left the backpack, the bracelet, the snowflake, and the song." Ethan nodded, his eyes shining with quiet gratitude. "I found every one of them." Emily glanced toward Claire and offered a shy smile. "Hello." Claire knelt beside her. "Hello, Emily. Your father taught you some amazing things." Emily looked back at Ethan before answering with complete innocence. "He says paying attention is another way of loving people." Claire felt those simple words settle deeply inside her heart. Outside, deputies quietly informed Sheriff Brooks that several individuals connected to the investigation had been peacefully taken into custody without injury as coordinated teams secured the remaining buildings. The operation that many feared would end in tragedy instead concluded with remarkable restraint because patience had defeated panic. As Ethan lifted Emily into his arms, she rested her head against his shoulder exactly as she had done when she was much younger. "Can we go home now?" she asked softly. Ethan kissed the top of her head. "Yes, sweetheart." He looked once toward the fading afternoon light spilling through the broken skylight. "It is time to go home." The evening sky above Black Ridge Quarry glowed with soft shades of gold and deep blue as emergency vehicles quietly prepared to leave one by one. The flashing lights that had filled the abandoned property only an hour earlier now reflected peacefully across the old limestone walls, no longer signaling danger but relief. Deputies loaded equipment with calm voices. Federal agents completed reports beneath portable lights. The entire operation ended not with chaos, but with an unusual silence that seemed to settle over everyone present. Emily Walker sat on the tailgate of her father's old Ford pickup wrapped in a warm blanket, happily sipping a cup of hot chocolate. Someone from the volunteer fire department had prepared for her. Her butterfly backpack rested beside her, still carrying the cardboard volcano she had worked so hard to finish. One corner had been bent during the long day, but she smiled anyway. "I can fix that tomorrow," she whispered. Ethan Walker looked at the project and smiled. "I know you can." Claire Bennett approached, carrying a small evidence envelope. She held out the folded paper snowflake Ethan had placed in his jacket earlier. "This belongs with your family," she said quietly. Ethan accepted it with both hands before giving it to Emily. The little girl unfolded it carefully and smiled at the familiar words she had written. "I told you," she said with complete confidence. "You always find me." Ethan gently rested his hand on her shoulder. "I never stopped looking." Claire stood there for a moment, watching the father and daughter with quiet admiration. During years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, she had seen expensive technology, highly trained specialists, and complicated operations solve impossible cases. Yet today the greatest advantage had not been equipment or authority. It had been trust carefully built over years between a father and his child. Sheriff Daniel Brooks soon joined them carrying a thin folder. "We have finished our preliminary interviews," he said. "Everyone involved is in custody, and Emily is safe because she stayed calm and because your guidance helped us understand what everyone else missed." Ethan simply nodded. "Thank you for bringing everyone home safely." Brooks looked almost embarrassed. "Truthfully, we followed your lead more than ours." Nearby, Deputy Collins quietly removed his hat once again before extending his hand toward Ethan. 15 years ago, I watched you teach people how to rescue strangers," he said. "Today I watched you rescue the person who mattered most." Ethan shook his hand with the same humility he had shown throughout the day. "I was never alone." Collins smiled. "No, you were not." Claire looked at Ethan one final time before speaking. "Will you ever tell me what you really did before Pine Creek?" Ethan glanced toward Emily, who was carefully repairing the bent corner of her science project with a little piece of tape someone had given her. A warm breeze carried the scent of pine through the quiet quarry as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. "That story belongs to another chapter of my life," he answered softly. "This chapter belongs to her." Claire followed his gaze and understood completely. Some people spent their lives chasing recognition. Ethan had quietly chosen something greater. He had traded medals for bedtime stories, missions for school mornings, and applause for the simple privilege of hearing his daughter laugh. As the last emergency vehicle pulled away, Ethan opened the passenger door of his truck. Emily climbed inside, hugged her backpack tightly, and looked through the windshield toward the road leading home. "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart." "Can we still go camping next weekend?" Ethan laughed gently, the first completely carefree laugh anyone had heard from him all day. "Absolutely." "Can we practice more secret clues?" she asked with a grin. "Only after we make pancakes." Emily nodded happily. "That is a deal." Ethan started the old engine, and the familiar rumble echoed softly across the quiet valley before the truck rolled toward the highway. Claire stood beside Sheriff Brooks until the taillights disappeared beyond the trees. "You know," she said quietly, "I came here expecting to save a frightened father." Brooks smiled thoughtfully. "Instead," Claire watched the empty road for another moment. "Instead, I met a man who proved that real strength is not measured by the battles you win. It is measured by the love you protect, the promises you keep, and the quiet dignity that never asks the world for applause." The mountains remained silent as evening settled over Pine Creek. But sometimes silence is the loudest kind of truth. It reminds us that the greatest heroes rarely wear uniforms forever. Sometimes they wear faded denim jackets, drive old pickup trucks, and spend ordinary mornings walking a little girl to school. The world may never know their names, but the children who grow up feeling safe because of them never forget.